Hey there, gang. Welcome back to the fifth part of the series, Harmony 5. That's good. Coming this summer to a theater near you. In a world laid waste by pestilence and oppression, a young boy makes a discovery that will take him places he could never have dreamed of. Grandpa, what's this thing I found in the basement? Oh, I haven't seen one of those since I was your age. It's a relic from before the Great Tribulation, a time when men and women could gather together and raise their voices as one. They called it harmony. Granddad, no! Commander, we found this among the old man's possessions. We must hide this thing from those fools on the Privy Council. We can't let this out into the general population. Do I make myself clear? Revolution! Raise your voice in harmony, etc. Sorry. I watched the Hunger Games last night. So I'm just marking out for the saddle slot here. A piece of tape, and I've just, these are the outside E-strings, and I'll figure out the appropriate compensation for those and we can join them up. I'll use the fret calculator from Stuart McDonald for that. Okay, to the center of the 12th fret we've got 319 millimeters, so total scale length is 638. So we got 640.2. I'm going to shorten that to 640, so I got a little bit of room to play with on the treble side. On the bass side, we have 643.3. And if I go to that measurement, I'll actually go about 643.5. Probably have the strings coming off near the front of the saddle and at the back of the saddle. I'm going to use a 1/8 inch blank. There are people who like 3/32 or the metric equivalent thereof, you know what I mean. The Gibson ones tended to be a little bit wider, and I think there's more room for compensation. I find that the Stuart McDonald measurements are a pretty good place to start. Like, I have some familiarity with how it sets up, and you know, I like using their figures, so that's what I'll do. If I was looking to be really precise, of course, afterwards I'd go and individually intonate each string. We'll see what we feel like when that time comes. Okay, got my slotting rig in place here. I've shown this before in previous videos. It's nothing fancy, just a board that gets clamped onto the surface of the guitar. Don't worry about these clamps here. They're padded on the underside, and I'm clamping over the area next to the side and the lining, so it's very stiff there. I'm not actually in danger of crushing the guitar, and they're not super tight. There is a tray that slides back and forth and can be angled to get the proper slant for the saddle, and that's pretty accurately fit to the base plate dimensions, so I can slide this back and forth and get a nice straight line. I'll be using an 1/8 inch Onsrud spiral router bit. This is a high-speed steel bit. I think they also make carbide ones, which are a good deal more expensive. I've never had a problem with the high-speed steel. And to set the depth of cut, we can talk about that. Generally speaking, I like to have as much of the saddle under the surface of the wood as is exposed on top. In this case, we've also got the undersaddle pickup to worry about, which is slightly less than 1 millimeter, so I have to add that into the equation. In this case, figuring there's probably going to be between 3/32 of an inch and which is what, 2.4 millimeters, and 3 millimeters, or you know, just under 1/8 of an inch exposure. I'm going with a 4 millimeter depth. So we put that on there and rest the router on top of it. Clamp that down a bit here. And I can lower that so the bit is in contact with the surface of the bridge. Lock it in place. When I take this out, now this is accurately set for 4 millimeters. And when I do the routing, I don't have to worry about changing the depth for the bit. I can do it in multiple series of passes just by running it back and forth and tilting the base plate and gradually getting down to the full depth. So that's how I do it. And I set it obviously to the line which I've drawn on the surface, going back and forth, making sure that it's exactly where I want it. This usually takes several tries to get perfect. You dial it in. Obviously I have the router unplugged at this point too during the setup. That seems important to say. Here's a little subtlety. Before I took the strings off on this guitar, I noted how far forward the bridge had rolled, and it made it look like the saddle was leaning forward towards the headstock. So what I'm going to do is add a couple of strips of masking tape on the front edge of the base plate here. And what that's going to do is effectively angle the saddle slot backwards by about 1 degree or so. So when the bridge rolls forward, it's still going to look like it's upright. And we're not going to lose any of the compensation factor. Anytime we're using an under saddle pickup, we want the saddle to be just a little bit looser than it would otherwise. This slips in just about right. You don't want it tight in the slot. But it shouldn't be flopping around. It should just go in just perfect. Yeah, that's about right. There's one little tight spot in the middle. I'm going to touch that up. Drilling out the pinholes, it's important to back up the work with a block of wood so we don't splinter everything out when the drill bit exits. I like to file a slight angle on the bottom of the bridge pins. This prevents the ball end of the string from getting hung up on the end of the pin when it's down in the guitar when you're stringing up. You know, sometimes you're tuning up and all of a sudden it goes bing because you had, you know, ½ an inch of string sort of stuck there. That prevents that from happening. Sanding the radius on the top of the saddle, cutting it roughly to height. Piezo style pickups work best with an angled hole so they don't have to kink over a hard right angle. On the far end of the pickup there's usually a dead spot a couple of millimeters long, so it's a good idea to drill a relief hole so that doesn't end up under the first string. We'll relieve the sharp corner there with some fine abrasive. And then another coat of Danish oil. Let's get rid of these nasty little fret ends here before they cut me to ribbons. Have to collect them in your hand because you don't want them kicking around on your bench for any length of time, because they're going to find their way into the finish of someone's very expensive guitar. Over the body, I protect the top with a little piece of sheet steel here, just in case. Just going to file these a little more flush, take some of the sharpness out of them. Because next I want to put on some side dot markers. A little medium viscosity super glue. While I'm here, I'm just going to put a little drop of super glue on the end of every fret to kind of fill the little gap that's there, although it's very small in this case. And if any of that stuff seeps in around the fret tang, it'll help to hold the fret ends down in years to come. Let's get rid of these funny old tuners while we're at it. To replace them, I'm going to put on these Wilkinsons, 3 on a plate. Not the most expensive, but they're better than what was on there. Taking some time to plug all the mispositioned screw holes with a little tapered dowel. I'm resizing the tuner holes to fit the bushings with a tapered reamer. This poplar is just soft enough that I can seat them by hand using a piece of plywood. They're good and snug, but not too snug. Those really do look better, and they feel better too. I think it's time to put in the pickup here. There was some excitement in the comment section the other day. People saying, hey, that looks like an LR Baggs Anthem, but it's not the current model. What is the model number on that? And it's obviously not. This is actually a clone, fairly carefully constructed, physically anyway, clone from the good people at Yan Shin, and they market it as Ascendus Folk Acoustic Jack with Microphone through Amazon. And yeah, I know. It has actually quite a lot of good reviews on Amazon, and it's about 1/5 the cost of the thing that it's supposed to look like. So I thought I'd give it a try and see if it's any good. I get a lot of questions from people who want to amplify budget or low-end guitars in a way that doesn't involve the sound hole pickup, and it's kind of hard to steer them in any one direction. I really like the K&K Pure series. They're probably my favorite pickup. I like them even better than the LR Baggs Anthem or the Lyric. They're the ones with the they go on the bridge plate underneath the saddle on several different dots that you have to super glue in place. It's not really an easy installation for someone who isn't used to working on guitars. This thing, though, there are people who need something that's even less expensive than that. We'll give this one a shot. If worse comes to worse, I can always take it out and put something else in. So we'll give it a try. Now, there's one thing that's really confounding when you try to amplify a harmony guitar, and that is sometime in the mid-50s, some bean counter probably came downstairs, took a look at the production and said, hey, wouldn't it be faster if you guys used the same size block for both the top and the bottom here? You wouldn't have to cut 2 different sizes, and we could save almost 3 cents per unit. He's probably on track for upper management. You know the type. So that's what they did. They used the same block that they put the dovetail in on this end of the guitar. And it's, more than 30 millimeters, which is very, very big as far as these things go. So you can drill your hole for your end pin jack and put that in there, and you unscrew it and you realize, geez, there's only 25 millimeters or an inch worth of thread on that. So you're about 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters short. You can drill the hole, but you'll never screw it in place. I suppose you could come up with some solution involving a great big counter bore, like a 20 millimeter counter bore that you would pull from the outside and bore a hole into the face of the end block. That's expensive technology. How many times are you going to do this in your life? Can you justify that cost? It's basically machinist quality tools, very expensive. So not for me. The way I've done this in the past is I've made a secondary block that gets glued onto the side next to the end block that's thick enough to provide adequate support for the jack itself. It's usually just over 1/2 inch or so. And yeah, that works fine. You couldn't rely on the 2 millimeter thickness of the mahogany for that, because as soon as the jack got knocked in one direction or the other, great big crack all the way along your side, and there goes your guitar. Gibson hollow bodies, they can do that because they've got laminated sides. Can't do it in this case. So that's what I'm going to do. The main stumbling block is, of course, that This being the side of a guitar, it's curved, and if you put a flat block up against the curved inner wall, you're only going to be contacting on the outside edges, and there's going to be a big gap there. You could slather it down with a whole lot of epoxy and try to mush it in place there, but that would be very messy. So I'm going to try and sand a complementary curve on the block so it fits in nicely, and we can glue it and it'll be solid and everyone will be happy. The block is about 2.5 inches wide, so if I move over 1.25 inches here, the curve actually corresponds pretty nicely with my 12-inch radius sanding block. Now I have to deduct the thickness of the sides, which are 2 to 2.5 millimeters from that, and then I should get a curve that matches pretty closely. So in this guitar we're in the enviable position of being able to see the thickness of the top and the back. That makes the calculations pretty easy. The total side width is about 92 millimeters in this area, and I know that the lining height is about 16 millimeters. So times 2 is 32. 92 minus 32 equals about 60 millimeters between the lining. I'm going to deduct a few more because of all that generous squeeze out that they've got in there. So we'll probably make it about 55 millimeters tall. And in terms of the actual width of the block, you know, we've got about 1/2 inch there. So let's make it about 1.25 inches. That should give us plenty of meat on both sides of the hole. Okay, to get the correct radius, I've got my 12-inch sanding block, a couple of sheets of inexpensive veneer which I have kicking around here, and a piece of sandpaper. When measured, these end up being close to about 90 thousandths of an inch, which is about 2.4 millimeters. So that should be about right. It'll be in the ballpark anyway. The next thing I want to do is put a chamfer on each edge. That means if there's any load directed at the jack, the force is going to be dissipated through the angle over a larger area of the side, and also transferred to the stiffer portion of the area near the linings in the top and back. This is Spanish cedar, which is a wonderful smelling wood. Martin used to use it for their necks in the 19th century into the early 20th century, and I use it on my classical necks. And if you ever make linings out of this, like the kerf linings or gluing blocks, it makes the inside of your guitar smell great for years and years. This is how I'm going to get this thing clamped. I've got a guitar string that's running through a nut and a washer, and those will be pulled tight from the outside of the guitar, holding this against the side. Now I've gone ahead and carefully scraped the inside surface just a little bit concave so that there's going to be good contact all the way around the outside perimeter. I don't have to worry about this thing falling off, remember, because there's going to be a jack that's literally screwing it in place, but it would be good to have good glue contact around the outside. I've gone ahead and I've drilled a small pilot hole, and I have to feed the string through, the one that's going to be attached to the clamp. So I've got another string through the end of the guitar now. We'll just make a little hook here. And hopefully that goes through. Which it did, very nice. Okay, now I'm going to put some paper towels inside the guitar to protect it from the glue. The irony of protecting the inside of a harmony guitar from glue splatter is not lost on me. I just don't want to add any more, you know what I mean. Okay, now I'm going to pull that in tight and see whether it lines up where I want it to. I can guide it 90% of the way with my hand. No, that's going to be too risky. Because I really do want this lined up, you know, with the grain running up and down, so. try that. Yeah, right. This is why you got to do test runs. Nope. Not great. I made a stick. It's got a screw in it though. I'm making a little mark to denote which side is up, and when it's down there I can look through the sound hole, make sure that that's oriented exactly the way I want it, and then I can pull it tight for gluing. Don't forget to wash off the surface that you're going to glue, and also sand. What's going on this side? And that's how studs are done. Nice. I like to bundle things up with zip ties in a way that makes sense before I actually get in there. Try to keep things as neat as possible. I'm going to run this in the opposite direction than I normally would, because having the jack towards the treble side means it's kind of a long stretch to take these things around. I don't think I've got enough room really to get this over here. I'm going to have to do it this way, which is okay. Not my first choice, but it'll work. Got the end of a 1/4 inch jack hooked up to some wire which I strung through the hole. I can use that to pull things into position. I can tell that I've got too many threads here, so I've got to back this out, and the wire just helps me hold things in place and makes it a much quicker job. I can do it inside the guitar. Well, one thing about this pickup, they only give you these great big gigantic wire holders. I have to bring in some of my own here. Ugh, it always takes about 3 times as long as you think it will to get all the little wires stuck in the places they need to stick. Anyway, that's enough for today. See you back here in a day or two for part 6.